Greetings! My name is Alex Rogals, and I am a lecturer in Japanese culture for the Japanese division at Hunter College. I am also a PhD student at the University of Hawaii, at Manoa, where I am completing my dissertation on the topic of contemporary Sagi-style Kyogen. I want to thank Mayan Barkan, Akio Furukawa, and the Japanese division for supporting my talk today, as well as the Japan Foundation and the Esther and Albert Corey Foundation for making this event possible. To the other presenters, I want to say thank you as well, and I am humbled to share this symposium on the contemporary non-professional performer of Japanese traditional performing arts. Finally, I want to thank President Rob and Hunter College for her ongoing support of the Japanese division here at Hunter. Today I'm going to be talking about the non-professional practice of Sagi Kyogen, and more specifically the Sagi Kyogen that is practiced in Yamaguchi City. So, examination of the traditional Japanese comedic performing art Kyogen is typically limited to the two remaining professional schools, the Okura School and the Izumi School. Kyogen's third school, the Sagi School, which has continued outside of the professional Kyogen world since the end of the Meiji period, has drawn limited attention. With the death of Sagi Kyogen's last Iemoto, or school grand master, Sagi Banno, in 1921, the two Sagi school families, the Niemon and Denemon lines, officially transformed from artistic traditions traced by family lineage into lines of non-professional volunteer performers in Yamaguchi City, where the Denemon style is, and on Sado Island in Niigata Prefecture, where the Niemon style is. Now, the Sagi school is no stranger to feeling the pressure of fitting in. Even its probable founder, Sagi Niemon Sogen, was accused of the Okura school's 13th Iemoto Okura Toraki in his 1651 Kyogen treatise called the Waran Baigusa, of practicing a flashy art with no form or pedigree that stole technique from the Okura school and made, quote-unquote, the ones with taste cringe. Now, Toraki also cruelly asserted that the name Sagi was coined because of Niemon's comically long neck, which resembled a heron, or a sagi, in Japanese when he was born. Now, with Sagi Kyogen's transformation to a non-professional art form in the Meiji period, actors once again have found themselves on the outside, and the shift from a professional art form into a regionalized volunteer one has required some serious rethinking on the parts of those who practiced it. No longer unified by the traditional boundaries of family artistry, the ways in which records have been kept, traditions maintained, and new performers discovered has been undeniably linked to the locations in which these art forms are preserved, practiced, and passed on. It's important to note that while this presentation does not focus on Sado Sagi Kyogen, Niemon-based traditions have continued alongside Yamaguchi since the beginning of the Meiji period. Sado Sagi Kyogen can trace two distinct lines of performers and has been supported by regional scholars since the foundation of the Sado Sagi Kyogen Research Society in 1984. Like Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, Sado Sagi Kyogen has been greatly influenced by its location, and Sado Sagi Kyogen activity is a vital part of my forthcoming dissertation. Additionally, a group in Saga Prefecture in Kanzaki City also practices Niemon-style Sagi Kyogen. The group is called Takashi Kyogen, which is named after the very small neighborhood in Kanzaki where the actors live, and where the Takashi Shrine, the site of their annual performance, is located. However, as this group's performances are infrequent and their style has been deeply influenced by the Okura and Izumi Kyogen styles, it's probably best to consider them simply Takashi-style Kyogen. For this reason, they're excluded from the scope of this presentation today. But they do, however, retain an original Sagi Niemon Sogen play called Hansen, which is one of only two known Kyogen plays with identical authors, and they do perform it on occasion. Now, before I get into it, I think in speaking about Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, it's important to invoke a term which for some, particularly those of us who are Americans, has a negative connotation, and that term is community theater. Now, I'll admit this term is an undeniably complicated one. A generic definition of this term simply means a play that takes place, a play that takes place among a group of people who live in the same place. Now, for Victor Turner, community was something more lofty, and his views on communitas in theater was the very embodiment of social togetherness that performance was capable of achieving. More recently, for Petra Kuppers, this term is intrinsically tied to marginalized groups and is a political act in nature. Interestingly, one might tie contemporary Sagi Kyogen to any one, if not all, of these potential definitions of community theater. It is certainly an art form that takes place in a very specific location, and one might go so far as to label it as an art form that operates on the fringes of the Kyogen world, making it sort of political. Also, perhaps more importantly, a major facet of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, if not the driving force behind it, both as a contemporary practice of a Japanese traditional performing art and as a recognized intangible cultural property, is the idea that somehow it is representative, if not indicative, of Yamaguchi cultural heritage. Yet, if we apply the same term community theater to something like Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, such a claim is a bit of a prickly pear. After all, what is the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen community? And more broadly, what is the Yamaguchi community? It is just as easy to say that the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen community or Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen is not representative of the contemporary Yamaguchi community as it is to say the opposite. I'm reminded of the bitter argument that takes place in the state of New York every time the government tries to change the default automobile license plates. On the one hand, some prefer that something intrinsically tied to New York, from a broad point of view, say the Statue of Liberty or the Empire State Building, should be the choice. On the other hand, those who do not live in the state's namesake city argue that choosing such a symbol is not indicative of their New York and feel to choose such a symbol would marginalize a large part of quote unquote New Yorkers. Adding to the complications of community is the dimension of tradition, which is equally as thorny a word as community, but it is a more frequently utilized term in Japanese culture to indicate a shared heritage. Kyogen itself is a traditional performing art of Japan, and so too does Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen ask to be identified by this marker, as well, further, as a traditional performing art of Yamaguchi. It's probably no surprise that those who have examined community and its dimensions have frequently considered the important role a sense of tradition plays in defining communities. Sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies, in his seminal work Community and Society, specifically talks about Gemeinschaft, or community, as being characterized by quote unquote well-defined habits of reunion and sacred customs. Yet, in spite of the obtuse nature of these words, in order to understand Sagi Kyogen's contemporary life, I believe it's critical to consider the role a sense of community and of tradition plays in the practice and preservation of the art form. As the New York example suggests, to present any sort of cohesive model that's intended to define and/or represent a collective Yamaguchi community is a futile effort. It's a sinking ship which continues to reveal new holes as old ones are plugged. However, I believe Sagi Kyogen's outsider status from its inception requires us to look at how professional and non-professional Sagi Kyogen defined itself, rather than engage in arguments as to, how well it did or did not toe the institutional line of professional Kyogen practice. This defining of its own set of boundaries is of note, particularly as it relates to the ideas of creating community. Anthony P. Cohen notes that boundaries mark the beginning and end of a community. The boundary encapsulates the identity of the community, and like the identity of the individual, is called into being by the exigencies of social interaction. Boundaries are marked because communities interact with in some way or another with entities from which they are or wish to be distinguished. So, in other words, a key to understanding the role of community and tradition, the role these play in contemporary Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, we can deduce this through examination of how contemporary Sagi Kyogen itself sets its own boundaries and how it invokes the words community and tradition. But, as I believe I'm hinting at, envisioning community or accepting something as quote unquote a tradition is not a one-way street. While anyone can claim something they are doing is representative of a shared heritage, it means little if the receiver of this information does not reciprocate or to some extent agree with the claimant. In the case of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, there are two things being asked of those who would engage with the art form and accept it as part of the Yamaguchi cultural heritage. First, simply, they are being asked to agree that some sort of Yamaguchi community might broadly exist. Secondly, they are being asked to consider and accept that Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen exists within the realm of this supposed community, and moreover, that it does indeed represent tangibly a part of Yamaguchi community and heritage. As such, In addition to examining the means by which Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen has and continues to make the case for its recognition as an important part of Yamaguchi cultural heritage, I'm also going to consider what Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen audiences have said about how they connect to a sense of community and tradition. This includes their relationship to Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, as well as a more broad relationship with traditional performing arts in Japanese culture. I will do this through the analysis of surveys which I distributed during 2 annual performances of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, one in November of 2016 and another in January of 2017. Now, when speaking of traditional Japanese performing arts, a common rallying point is the notion of an unbroken line of artistic transmission, that somehow what is now is consistent to what once was. But I want to be clear from the outset, it's probably not accurate to call contemporary Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen Denemon Sagi Kyogen. Time and the realities of artistic transmission of a living tradition have undeniably deviated from that which was once Denemon Sagi Kyogen. Now, it's true some vestiges remain, and they have helped guide and inform Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. However, there's little to be gained in trying to argue for consistency of form. Expending energy trying to fit a round peg into a square hole does not exactly encompass Sagi Kyogen's unique life in Yamaguchi, nor does it give the proper credit to those performers who have operated under this, shall we say, non-traditional way of doing things. On the other hand, the systems under which the professional Kyogen have operated historically and in contemporary Japan do inform the processes by which Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen is practiced and performed. Like the professional world, Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen has a style which is unique to Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, and it's passed down from actor to actor. Actors learn fixed patterns of movement and speaking style that draw on a combination of denemon techniques that remain, as well as innovations that have developed over time with successive generations of practitioners. The actors draw on a fixed set of plays as well, 43 in total, as written down by second-generation Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen actor Kawano Haruomi. These plays can be found across the Kyogen. These plays, generally speaking, can be found across all the Kyogen schools, though there are noticeable differences that are unique to Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Some examples include change indicative of location, such as the play Miyagi Daimyo, which is better known in the professional Kyogen world as Hagi Daimyo, due to the fact that Hagi was a stronghold for Yamaguchi's Choshu clan during the Edo era. The disparaging portrayal of a country bumpkin daimyo from Hagi was unacceptable, and Sagi actors changed the offending character's hometown to Miyagi. Other notable changes are minor and can be seen in professional Kyogen scripts as well, such as the kind of animals the Yamabushi or mountain priest pretends to be in Kaki Yamabushi or the persimmon thief, and different ruses Taro Kaja, the main servant, employs to steal sake and chidori or catching plovers. Professor Hideo Inada of Yamaguchi Prefectural University will speak more on chidori at this evening's live stream at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, on occasion, Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen actors, like professionals, have written shinsaku or new Kyogen, which takes their stylistic cues from the plays in the repertory. In 2016, the group performed the shinsaku Kyogen Tanuki Damashi, or Deceiving the Badger. This is actually an older play, but I saw it in 2016. It was written by the play's current group head, Yonemoto Fumiaki, and tells the story about a badger who gets his revenge on a passerby after being tricked by him. I was also informed this past year that a student at a Yamaguchi Prefectural University wrote a play for the group, though I'm not sure of its content. At any rate, it's safe to say that in many ways Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen is just like the contemporary professional model. However, as I'm sure you can infer, there's a certain balancing act that inevitably takes place in the world of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. This applies not only to the way in which Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen positions itself with regards to the professional families, but also with regards to how they view their activities in a broader sense. As Fumiaki explained to me when I first used the word amateur to describe their activity in 2016, he said, "We're not professionals, but we're not amateurs either. Amateurs do Kyogen as a hobby, but for us it's a full-time job. But we don't get paid. It's complicated." While my dissertation deals more specifically with this balancing act, as I have said, today I want to talk specifically about the ways the locale of Yamaguchi and a sense of community and tradition has galvanized, defined, and guided the practice, performance, and preservation of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. So, one of the main ways Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen makes a case for its role as a traditional performing art of Yamaguchi is through lineage tracing, which of course is a common way professional Japanese traditional arts demonstrate their connection to the past. However, for Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, theirs is not a lineage of family, but rather a lineage of performers linked by locale and by art form. The word which Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen uses to describe those who are responsible for maintaining and passing on the art form is transmitter. Today's Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen performers include these transmitters, who are a father named, as I've already mentioned, Yonemoto Fumiaki, um, but also his son Yonemoto Taro, as well as some who come to the art form for a variety of personal reasons and do not have the same level of responsibility. As you can see here from the line of transmitters, the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen line begins with professional Denemon Sagi-style Kyogen actor Shunichi Shosaku. Shunichi, the second son of a Choshu clan samurai, was born in 1817 in the town of Hagi, which is the neighboring town to Yamaguchi City. And by 1858, records indicate he was studying with Denemon X, presumably in Tokyo, as this is where Denemon was residing at the time. Now, when Shunichi returned to Yamaguchi to perform Sagi Kyogen under the patronage of the Choshu clan, he did so sometime before the end of the Edo era, and the dissolution of the clan system at the beginning of the Meiji Restoration caused Shunichi to give up his Kyogen acting career. He subsequently moved to the city of Ube, about 1 hour south of Yamaguchi City, to become a farmer. However, in 1886, he was invited to perform as part of a ceremony celebrating the completion of recent construction at Noda Shrine in Yamaguchi. His performance was so favorably received that he decided to move back to Yamaguchi City and begin teaching Denemon-style Sagi Kyogen. This resulted in a line of transmitters in Yamaguchi City that continues through today. This also established a long-running relationship with Noda Shrine, where today annual productions of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen take place every other year. Yonemoto Taro has continued to cultivate the relationship with this shrine, and you will find him offering Yamaguchi residents fortunes for the new year in a stall set up at Noda Shrine and utilizing the space for the children's Kyogen Classroom, which I'll speak about in a bit. So the early transmitters of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen did not really have any formal organization beyond getting together to practice and perform the art. When Shunichi died in 1897, the interest in Sagi Kyogen began to wane. Only two of his three students, Nakanishi Jiro and Yoshimi Yasutaro, served as transmitters, and for a long period of time there's this gap in focused practice and performance, which inevitably eroded the style. Nakanishi himself was still in the learning process and continued by learning that which he didn't learn from Shunichi from Yoshimi. Then in 1939, the group invited Kawano Haruomi and Kayano Koji to join. Unfortunately, Yoshimi became bedridden after only about 3 years of training, and training these actors, and he died in 1941. Though Yoshimi had managed to pass on much of his knowledge, particularly to who had become his primary student, Nakanishi, World War II and its immediate aftermath continued to raise challenges for Sagi Kyogen in Yamaguchi. The first was that Kayano retired. Furthermore, Noda Shrine had decided it would no longer financially support Sagi Kyogen. Fortunately, the Yamaguchi city superintendent, Ito Riki, was a fan of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, and he managed to acquire donations from the city for costumes and performances, as well as to secure the Yamaguchi Community Center for Sagi Kyogen rehearsals and performances. These actions would in turn lead to the establishment of the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen Preservation Society in 1954, which was comprised of Sagi Kyogen actors, local scholars, city officials, and interested community members. It is here where we might first note the reciprocation on the part of the non-Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen actors from the Yamaguchi community in supporting the idea that Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen is an example of Yamaguchi heritage worthy of support. The society named local businessman Mizuno Fumio as its first chairman, and he worked to spread interest in Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, finance performances, and create archival records of activities. The designation of a chairman who's tied to Yamaguchi local businesses has been an ongoing strategy, actually, in keeping the community connected to and supporting the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen efforts. Today, the group is headed by Akinori Kinoshita, who took the position in 1998. But it's not just the city's support that has helped Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen along. It was also in 1954 that Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen was named a prefectural intangible cultural art, and three of its transmitters, Kawano, Kayano, who subsequently unretired, and Nakanishi, were all named prefectural intangible cultural assets as well. So the art form was named as a cultural asset, and the actors, several of the actors, were named as cultural assets. So I'll talk more about what this means in a bit, but for now I want to keep talking about this line of transmitters. So, in two new performers, Kobayashi Eiji and Fujisawa Usaburo, joined the group in 1954. Unfortunately, Fujisawa died unexpectedly in 1960 at the age of 33, which led to the question of who would carry on the traditions. The third generation Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen actor Kobayashi Eiji, uh, the group's most recent head before Yonemoto Fumiaki, notes that by the time he had joined in 1954, while Denemon's speech techniques had remained intact, fundamental kata such as kamae or stance and hakobi or the way of walking had become vague and lacked specificity. He further notes that while the group had kept play scripts written by Shunichi, the notations themselves were sparse, and though he could understand the stage directions, many of the stylistic flourishes that made the form uniquely Denemon style Kyogen had been lost. These artistic challenges were coupled with a sharp decline in repertory, as generally speaking, volunteers wanted to perform plays that they liked. This led to many of the plays becoming unperformable by Kobayashi's time, and all komai, or short dances, and aikyogen, or the pieces that would accompany no, were completely lost. Now, by the 1970s, Kobayashi faced a pretty big crisis. He was now part of a long-standing Yamaguchi practice that could be traced through an identifiable group of performers, but the physical form had lost much of its specificity. But then in 1977, Ando Masayuki, an experienced amateur Hosho and Kita no student, was invited to practice Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Together, he and Kobayashi would embark on a mission to address the artistic decline of the Denemon style Kyogen and inspire a practice model for today's generation, deeply empowered by Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen's role as a traditional performing art of Yamaguchi. The first way Kobayashi and Ando sought to accomplish this was to re-establish fundamental kata. However, they needed a basis and decided to utilize their extensive experience as amateur no students. As a result, Kobayashi notes that in today's Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, kamae, the way the actors hold fans, and hakobi techniques are influenced by his and Ando's experience watching and performing Kita-style no performances and shimai. Yonemoto Taro suggests that both Kobayashi and Ando were deeply interested in exploring the quote-unquote no within Kyogen. In addition to Kobayashi and Ando's artistic goals, there was also the issue of increasing interest. Previous outreach efforts had met with little success. A public advertisement in 1966 gathered 18 new members, but within just 2 years, only one member remained. Yonemoto Bunmei, who joined the group in 1986, suggests the reason for this was that too much emphasis was placed on preservation, and that only certain people were selected to perform plays. So basically, it just wasn't any fun. In turn, he notes that they decided the solution to this problem was to give Yamaguchi residents a greater sense of ownership by making an annual performance opportunity for those who wanted to, regardless of ability, part of the membership benefit. As a result, in 1991, the Kyogen Classroom, which I'll discuss later, was established. It meets on a weekly basis at the Yamaguchi Hometown Tradition Center, which is itself a tangible cultural property of Yamaguchi, having once been a sake merchant brewery built in 1886. Now, Ando died unexpectedly in 1996, and Kobayashi retired in 2013 and passed away in 2017. Today, Yonemoto Fumiaki and his son Taro, who have been leading the group since Kobayashi's retirement, are the primary transmitters of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Fumiaki, a recently retired postman and longtime farmer, became a recognized prefectural intangible cultural asset in 2002. Taro, like a professional Kyogen actor might, actually began his Kyogen career at the age of 3. starting in 1985. He's also the only Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen actor to have professional training experience studying Kanzei no at the Tokyo University of Fine Arts and Music. Taro decided not to continue pursuing a professional career in No and returned to Yamaguchi for the specific purpose of continuing to support Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Today, the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen Hozonkai, or Preservation Society, provides the infrastructure for Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, and it includes actors, scholars, and various supporters from the community. Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen has utilized the Preservation Society model to support preservation, obviously, bolster artistic transmission efforts, obtain funding, and cultivate performance opportunities. As such, these organizations have been integral tools in establishing historical precedents for and cultivating the bond between Sagi Kyogen and the Yamaguchi community. That being said, the foundation of the Preservation Society was not only a means to strengthen the group's organizational structure. The Preservation Society has become a countrywide accepted system of organization in Japan, which all groups who wish to obtain intangible cultural heritage status typically establish and maintain. While the professional world of traditional performing art forms such as Kyogen enjoy an embedded infrastructure making the Preservation Society unnecessary, this is not the case for art forms like Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Most importantly, at least, at first, the incentive for gaining this status is not just a recognition on a local or even national level. It also provides monetary support to help ensure the continued activity of the intangible cultural property in question. This monetary support is not unique to the non-professional world. The professional world also benefits from being recognized in this way and receives money. However, in order to retain this status, there are of course some rules. Articles 71 through 77 in the Law for the Protection of Cultural Property, which was passed in 1950, state that along with preserving the tradition itself, the recipient of this status, be they a person or group, must offer records and continue to keep records, train successors. All of this is in Article 74, as well as provide adequate public exposure of this property, which is in Article 75. As such, the Hozonkai has been an important means for fulfilling these requirements. Now, I've already spoken about the process by which transmitters in Yamaguchi have successfully, or at least partially successfully, passed on performance techniques from actor to actor. Turning to the requirement to keep records of such things, scholarship has played a critical role in Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Yamaguchi Prefectural University, which was founded in 1941 as Yamaguchi Women's College, originally served as an important partner to Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen when it became recognized by the prefecture as an intangible cultural property, displaying Shinichi Shosaku's original writings. In addition, Professor Ishikawa Yaichi was responsible for the preservation of these artifacts and served as a scholarly support base for the Hozonkai. The college became co-ed and was renamed in 1996, and in the last 20 years, Professor Hideo Inada has taken over the duties that Ishikawa had. Today, Professor Inada is the current resident scholar for the Yamaguchi Preservation Society. In 2001, together with another important scholar in Japanese traditional performing arts, Kobayashi Seki, and the Yamaguchi Department of Education, the group published a 3-volume set compiled by the university, entitled A Collection of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen Documents, which includes all of the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen's performers' handwritten play scripts and Shinichi's short dances or komai scripts. Like Ishikawa before him, Professor Inada is also the group's archivist, keeping records of performance dates, plays performed, and recognitions Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen actors have received. In addition to providing written scholarship, Professor Inada, though not a performer himself, also attends rehearsals regularly. As many of the newer members of the group are unable to read the archaic language of Sagi Kyogen, he, along with Yonemoto Fumiaki and Yonemoto Taro, provide correct reading and serve as a dramaturgical source when needed. As he is the keeper of all video records of the group's performances since the 1980s, he's often consulted on matters of performance style when the group approaches a play that they haven't performed in a long time. Now, these videos are also incredibly useful in addressing stylistic consistency, and Professor Inada has diligently studied these records, and he serves as the group's authority on historical precedents. Last but not least, Inada plays an indispensable role as a spokesman for Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, teaching students about Sagi Kyogen and providing students at the university about Sagi Kyogen and providing introductions for plays prior to their performances during the annual performances that they do. His role as a professor at Yamaguchi Prefectural University has also been instrumental in connecting the group to the university for performance space for the past 10 years. Since up until 2018, so from 2008 to 2018, as well as helping facilitate a trip to the Winter Plum Festival at Center College in Kentucky back in 2014. Now, unfortunately, Yamaguchi Prefectural University decided in January 2018 that this would be the last sponsored performance held at Yamaguchi Prefectural University's auditorium. However, it's certainly possible that this may resume at some point in the future, and Yonemoto Taro has been a regular fixture in the Yamaguchi Prefectural University classrooms of late, where he works on guest lectures. He also has been working with students on different ways to get the word out, working on technology initiatives and grassroots initiatives. So, if scholarship seeks to establish a historical precedent for Yamaguchi's effect on Sagi Kyogen's past development, then the current outreach activities of the Preservation Society serve to ensure that Yamaguchi residents are molding the tradition's future. Such activities include discovering and nurturing future successors, as is required in Article 74 of the Preservation Law, but it also includes engagement with the Yamaguchi community, meeting the requirements of Article 75, and making a case why the public should, care about preserving and protecting the art form. Of course, the first and simplest way of engaging with the public is through performance. Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen could, from 2008 to 2018, be seen twice during the year at an annual performance or a Teiki Koen. One would be held either at Noda Shrine or an alternate location, typically one of Yamaguchi's various community centers. Additionally, there are numerous additional performances throughout the year which are scheduled on a case-by-case basis. In my year in Yamaguchi from 2016 to 2017, I was present for 7 different performances, and these aren't all of them. I just went to 7 that were held in Yamaguchi City and within the prefecture. In recent years, the group has spearheaded the Yamadera concert effort, which includes Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen performances, both adult and sometimes children's Sagi Kyogen, along with other guest performers that do something besides Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Additionally, before my period of field research began in October 2016, I attended the second Sagi Kyogen joint performance held in Sagi Prefecture, again, where that version of Niemon-style Takashi Kyogen resides. Now, the first one took place in 2004 at the Yamaguchi Media Center, which opened in the previous year in 2003. The Yamaguchi Media Center is an amazing hub of cultural activity and experimental art, and the Preservation Society will actually be meeting us via the Yamaguchi Media Center at 7:30 tonight. Now, there was going to be another group performance scheduled for fall 2018, but unfortunately, a typhoon warning forced the event to be canceled at the last minute. I had actually planned on going, and I was called literally right before I was about to get on a plane to say that it was canceled. So these Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen productions showcase since 1991 the efforts of the Kyogen Classroom, which I mentioned previously, and the performers who make up the acting troupe of the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen Preservation Society. Actors are mainly from the Yamaguchi City community, but there are a few who travel from outside it, one as far as Hiroshima, who participates. The decision for what these performances will be, these annual performances, and who will be acting in what is decided upon the current senior member of the group, Yonemoto Fumiaki, typically after the winter performance that occurs just after the New Year. So over the span of the next year, the actors practice their respective plays on a weekly Saturday evening rehearsal at the Hometown Tradition Center, with all members attending every rehearsal regardless of whether or not they practice on that particular week. The rehearsal room is separated into two rooms. The space is two rooms, and depending on the proximity of the performance, more than one group at a time may be rehearsing their performance during a rehearsal. Typically, in this case, either Taro or Fumiaki may preside over the respective rehearsal, but it's also common that one group works on their own in the alternate room and then returns to the main room, where Fumiaki and Taro will give them notes. Of course, you've probably noted that I've mentioned Fumiaki as the acting head of the group, yet Taro is involved with the teaching process. This is sort of a team effort on the part of father and son, particularly after Taro returned from his schooling at Tokyo University of Fine Arts and Music. In fact, though Fumiaki is, for all intent and purpose, the head of the group and has been recognized now as the only living member of the group who is an intangible cultural asset of Yamaguchi Prefecture, Taro views his relationship with his father as less of a grand master to student and more of a senpai or senior to his kohai or junior status. In fact, Fumiaki is clearly the head of the although Fumiaki is clearly the head of the group, the entire rehearsal process is actually quite egalitarian, with actors who have played the roles previously often giving advice to their fellow actors, and on odd occasion, when neither Taro or Fumiaki are present, rehearsing on their own, or in some cases with a senior member of the group. I saw one of the people who will be at the at the screening tonight, Tsuchimura Hirotaka. I saw him leading a rehearsal while I was there. So this spirit of cooperation and collaboration is no doubt combating Fumiaki's previously noted observation about things being quote-unquote no fun. So Bunmei suggests that the reasons for this actual model of instruction grew out of practicality. The volunteer part-time nature of the endeavor, coupled with the fact that the group must constantly appeal to the potential new members and encourage them to stay, has resulted in a more quote-unquote laid-back approach. That being said, the freedom birthed by this necessity has a notable effect on creating a sense of ownership over the form. In addition to performance for the general public, there is also a strong emphasis on children's performances, both for and starring. Taro runs the children's Kyogen Classroom, which is intended to inspire Yamaguchi children to learn about and participate in Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, specifically as a representation of their shared cultural heritage. This activity began as an extension of the group's long-standing relationship with Odono Middle School. And since 1950, students have performed Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen as part of the school's annual Bunkasai, a fall cultural festival held in most elementary through high schools across the country, in which students present a variety of artistic achievements. Today, Taro teaches students from Odono, as well as other children who have learned about Sagi Kyogen through performances in their respective schools. Like the adult classrooms, students typically rehearse with the expectation of performing. From October 2016 to January 2018, students performed on multiple occasions throughout Yamaguchi. In the summer of 2017, a female student from Odono Middle School officially joined the Preservation Society and performed as part of the 2017 fall performance. And, of course, among the variety of annual performances, there are any number of scheduled in-school performance workshops of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. These are typically scheduled based on requests and whether or not the actors are able to make the request work with their own private work schedules. Again, they're volunteers. So Taro is typically the linchpin for these events and is responsible not only for performance, but leading the after-performance workshops with students. The final and perhaps most important part of the Kyogen Classroom is the method by which the group acquires new actors and potential transmitters. Adult classes are offered in partnership with the Hometown Tradition Center every summer and give potential new members the chance to practice Kyogen for 6 weeks. After the program is over, students are invited to join the Preservation Society and continue practicing regularly with the understanding that they can perform during an annual performance. About half the current membership joined Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen through this method. I participated as a student in the summer of 2017, where I was taught the perennial Kyogen favorite, shibiri, or the cramps. I'd like to conclude my presentation today by looking at the result of surveys which I conducted in the fall of 2016 and the winter of 2017. Distributed to all attendees of the performances, these surveys were voluntary and blind, and asked participants to questions regarding their relationship to Yamaguchi, as well as to Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. They also cast a wider net asking participants about their relationship with Japanese traditional performing arts more generally speaking, with the purpose of deducing how contemporary Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen audiences relate to tradition and traditional performing arts, as well as how they believe such art should be maintained. I distributed a total of 800 surveys, 500 at the fall performance and 300 at the winter performance, and I received a total of 258 responses. It's also important to note that the fall performance was held at Noda Shrine, while the winter performance was done at Yamaguchi Prefectural University, or YPU. As such, it's clear from the returned surveys that questions regarding the duration of time a respondent has lived in Yamaguchi, their age, and their relationship with Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen is impacted by the location of, the performance. The fall performance was comprised of mostly town residents, while the Yamaguchi Prefectural University performance was heavily populated by students from the university. Age was also affected by these different venues. While 74% of respondents at the Noda Shrine performance were 50 and above, at the YPU performance, 51% were 21 and below, and the only 26 respondents were 50 and above. Almost all the YPU respondents in the majority also listed that they were, in fact, college students. To look at who these audience members are more generally, 100% of those in attendance in both venues had indicated that they had seen some type of Japanese traditional performing art before. In terms of Kyogen, more directly, 63% of all respondents had seen Kyogen outside of Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, mostly professional, though 37% said that they'd never seen Kyogen besides Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen. Now, the audiences are split in terms of age demographics, also revealed an interesting answer to the question. The question, quote unquote, I feel pressure from the sort of yes-no question. I feel pressure from family, society to support traditional things. While the older generations listed this as a concern, the younger generations found this to be less of one. There was also a stronger response by the older participants at both venues to agree that changing the contents of traditional performing art may lead to that art being viewed as no longer traditional, while the younger generation seemed to be less concerned with such distinctions and suggested that they really couldn't say one way or the other, or they expressed the belief that change does not necessarily affect whether the traditional performing art should lose its relationship with tradition if there are changes. Interestingly enough, almost everyone in the survey agreed that protecting Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen is something that's important, and that they can still relate to it. At Noda Shrine, the performance, 99% of respondents said preservation was important, and 87% said that though it was old, it was still relatable. At YPU, a similar 95% of respondents said preservation was important, while 76% agreed its age did not make it unrelatable. However, when looking at the data for the question whether or not the audience believed it was important for Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen to continue in Yamaguchi, with 1 being the most important and 5 being the least important, 61% of Noda Shrine respondents ranked this as a low priority, with 4 being the most common answer. Interestingly, YPU respondents ranked Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen preservation a bit higher, with 56% saying it was a low priority. Though, of course, it can't be denied that this is still a majority of respondents. This is a curious imbalance when considering the majority of respondents were YPU students who were not from Yamaguchi, whereas those at Noda Jinja were. Moreover, these answers seem to conflict with the question previously asked, which had overwhelming support for the idea that preservation was important. Well, why is this? Well, it could have been due to an error on my part in the explanation of the series of questions in which the answer was given. It may not have been clear to what the respondents that each of the questions that they could rank individually these questions from 1 to 5, rather than looking at the group of 6 questions as a group and rating them in relation to each other. It's also possible that when looking at the other question in this group, which included things like I'm interested in Japan's traditional performing arts and Kyogen's content is interesting, seeing these ideas next to one about preservation created a perspective in which respondents felt, relatively speaking, that preservation was not as important as those other things. Another curious piece of data is that 42% of the Noda Shrine people knew about Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen's outreach efforts to attract new members, but virtually no one knew this at the YPU performance. In the rated question that asked whether or not they could meet friends through Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, the total percentage of those who ranked this the least important at both events was a staggering 90%. So what we see here is that even though there's a strong belief that preservation is important, and a good amount of the participants, when introduced to the idea that they could participate, participants still rated connecting with people through Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen as something they weren't interested in doing. Returning to the subject of community building, this is a rift that exists between the desire to see something continue and the desire to be part of the effort, at least as an actor. And it creates an interesting view of challenges that Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen faces. 47% of respondents suggested that the role of preservation can be taken up by anyone who's willing to help, and 25% said it should be the role of the Yamaguchi community. Only 4% put the responsibility solely on the actors. This suggests that the survey participants were resolute in their belief that to continue Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, a collective effort is necessary. But in their own personal interests, doing so was not something high on their list. It is undeniable that statistics like this are at the heart of modern Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen's predicament. Evident support for their work indicates that there is indeed Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen community, as well as a sense of larger Yamaguchi community in which the art form is tied to. However, who is responsible for making sure that these communities remain and the art form endures? Well, that seems to be a task that not many people are willing to take on. So if we're to compare the community that the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen Preservation Society is trying to cultivate with the realities represented in this survey material, Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen remains, even in the hearts and minds of its supporters, on the periphery. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. If you're intrigued by Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen, and I hope you are, I encourage you, if you haven't already, to sign up for the live stream performance at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time this evening, where Hunter College Japanese Division will be co-hosting a live stream performance with the Yamaguchi Sagi Kyogen Preservation Society. Thanks very much.